to the 51st Kilkenny Arts Festival. We are delighted to present today Anna O'Sullivan in conversation with Liane Lang and Aideen Barry. Hi. In a highly unlikely event of emergency, please note the fire exits. And please take this opportunity now to turn off your mobile phones. And there is no photography being taken during the performance. Thank you for your attention. Please welcome Liane Lang, Aideen Barry, and Anna O'Sullivan. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and you're very welcome to the Parade Tower. I hope most of you have had the chance to view Liane Lang's exhibition, Deep Time Dip. We are open every day except Monday, and we're open till 8 o'clock on Thursdays. So you can check out our website at butlergallery.com for details. For the complete experience, I'd also encourage you all to view the 49-minute program of video works by Liane playing in our digital gallery. They are a must-see and provide the full breadth of Liane's practice and help to inform what you see in the gallery. Firstly, grateful thanks are extended to the Arts Council of Ireland, our main funders, and to the Kilkenny County Council, and to all our other supporters and friends of the gallery. We cannot do what we do without the collective generosity of you all. A little background on our panel to begin with. Liane Lang, here on my left, on your right, studied at the National College of Art and Design in Dublin and took a BA in Fine Art at Goldsmiths College, London, and an MFA at the Royal Academy Schools, London, graduating in 2006. She lives and works in the East End of London. Liane has exhibited widely both in the UK and internationally, including the Royal Academy of Arts, London, the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Calais, PS1 New York, the Kunstwerk in Berlin, James Freeman Gallery, London, the Worksworth Festival, Derbyshire, and the Musée Guggenheim, Bilbao. Her most recent exhibition, Touchstone, was on view at the Whitaker Museum, Rosendale, in the UK from the 14th of March to the 26th of May of this year. Liane's work is held in numerous public and private collections such as the Royal Academy of Arts, MoMA, the V&A, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Arts Council England, the Saatchi Collection, Deutsche Bank, Kunstverein Bregenz, Ernst & Young, and the collection of the Kunstamt Spandau, Berlin. Aideen Barry is a visual artist based in Ireland but with an international profile. Her work encompasses a vast range of disciplines. Her subjects, including domestic labour, environmental changes, classism, intersectionality, human vulnerability, as a way to consider invisible and sinister systems. Her means of expression are interchangeable, incorporating performance, sculpture, film, text, and experimental lens-based media. She's a member of AS Thorna and an associate of the Royal Hibernia Academy. Her work is in prestigious private ownership in public museums, collections globally, including the Butler Gallery. She has exhibited widely at venues, including her upcoming representation of Ireland at the Bangkok Art Biennale, Thailand, her solo show at the Welt Museum in Vienna in 2026, and ongoing collaboration with Salzburger Kunstverein in Austria, the Musée der Moderne Salzburg in 2026, and her solo show at Oakville Galleries in Toronto next year in 2025. She's currently working with Philip Miller, Seiko Fatso, Monet, and William Kentridge at his foundation, the Centre for the Less Good Idea, on a film opera project inspired by the Cork-born surgeon and trans icon Dr. James Barry, and is also working on a collaboration with musician Peter Gabriel for a project next year. In 2025, she will be a fellow at the prestigious Civitella Ranieri Foundation in Italy. Busy girl. We can start with, we're going to show a loop of Liane's work playing in the background, so it'll be a reference to some earlier work that you may not have even seen. Some of it will include a few pieces that are on show at the Butler Gallery, but it gives you a little bit of a context of the practice. So actually, just to kick off before Liane, I was in this exhibition, Deep Time Dip, we've included 3 bodies of work: Monumental Misconceptions, Glorious Oblivion, and Touchstone. Can you expand a little on your practice as a whole before we let Aideen delve into further? Just a little bit.
Okay, hiya. My work moves between sculpture and photography, and it kind of has always done that, with the emphasis sometimes being on the photography and sometimes on the sculpture. And the early work that you see in the exhibition is entirely photographic, but within the images there are sculptural elements that I have made, and also I have photographed statues, and that period of work was all about statuary. My work, I think, comes out nicely in that show, is about the idea of the object and memory. So memorials, legacy, memorialization, and what remains of a life.
That brings you up to Touchstone then.
Yes, it does. So the most recent body of work, which takes up the biggest part of the gallery, I suppose, is called Touchstone, and started with a residency I did in rural Derbyshire. And the project started with the idea of working with lead. There's a lot of lead mining in that area, and I was given quite a bit of lead, and there's a piece in the show that is actually from a medieval church in Wirksworth. They had some re-roofing done, and they gave me 2 rolls of their roofing lead to work with. And then it expanded from there, so I started to look at all the kind of materiality, things that were quarried and mined there, how they were used, and then going right back to the Neolithic period, the stones, the way the stones were used as probably some kind of memorial or ritual space, but of course not so much is known what they were for. And so that was the kind of way into that landscape, and to think about what that means.
That's great, Liane. We'll have a chance at the end for some questions. The last half hour we'll pass out to the audience, but I'll pass you on to Aideen now.
Okay, so what I was going to start off by saying is like how this even happened, because just before we talked, I said, did you ever think we'd ever be here, Liane? It was 12 years ago, Liane and I were on this very prestigious residency called Art Oh in upstate New York. And in advance of the residency, we were given out a list of artist websites to see who was participating in the residency program.
Oh yeah, sorry, thanks. And I saw your website, and I remember going, "Oh my God, I never felt so intimidated in my life, seeing the weight of the work." But it was like this idea of, I'd never seen really a German artist kind of take on board like monumentality in the way that you were doing, and especially in this like post-colonial way, post-World War II way, looking at the relationship between these giant sculptures, post-Soviet sculptures, and then juxtaposing that within this kind of presentation of the female form in what was like this hyper-masculine kind of space, kind of just what we're just seeing here. This was one of the images I saw on the website, and I remember being so taken aback, because in Ireland we also have this legacy of monumentality. Of course we do. It's a legacy of empire, and I wanted to find out, like, how did you arrive at, first of all, going into this subject matter, or being like considering these spaces or these monuments first? What was the journey? What was the first point of departure?
So I did a project when I was a student at the Royal Academy with the statues they have in the schools and in the collection, which were these plaster copies of famous statues. And the idea behind that was, for hundreds of years, art schools would have this stuff standing around, and the idea would be that you would sketch it, and the great artistry would somehow rub off on you. And everyone had got rid of it, but the Royal Academy hadn't got rid of them. They were still there.
Old school.
Yes, indeed. It took them a very long time to modernize, I suppose. So we kind of got lucky in that sense that was still there. And it really made me think about the statue and the sculpture, and I had the sort of ability to physically get involved with it and put my figures on there and take photographs. And that was the beginning of being interested in what sculpture or statuary is. And then I saw images of the Memento Sculpture Park in Budapest. And my family history is somewhat affected by that period because my father was born in Berlin, and his family were on the eastern side of the wall. So I have that kind of connection to the DDR and that kind of history, and it was really interesting for me. to have the opportunity then to go to Budapest and make work with these statues. And I think it's always about the idea of what the object does in space, and it's so overwhelmingly enormous. There's no consultation of any kind. The statues were dropped. In fact, in the show, you'll see one picture which is called the parachutist, because that was the nickname Hungarians gave to these Soviet statues. They're just as if they were dropped from an airplane. And, you know, when we think now about public statuary and public sculpture, and we're sort of trying to make things make sense within the context and talk to the history of the place, or to talk to the community, the absolute opposite was happening there. People had no idea that the next day in their small city park would be a 25-foot sailor.
But then, you know, time has moved on, and, you know, over the course of our friendship, the context around this work has shifted, as we've seen like Colston thrown into the river. We've seen Cecil Rhodes defaced in Cape Town. So the monument has become this space of real debate, and this idea around like identity and legacy and trauma. So has that kind of shifted then within your own understanding of the work, like as the context has shifted?
It has. Actually, also the work itself shifts meaning all the time. So that is, I suppose, a risk that you take when you photograph things that are in the real world, or you work with things in the real world. So when I was doing that project, it was 2009-10, there was nothing but a sort of smiling nostalgia around these statues. Nobody had any problem with me doing the project. And it was just, you know, people were like, oh, because it was, you know, considered something that was in the past. And the Hungarians don't really visit that park very much. It was mostly Germans, actually. The odd American that went out there, took 2.5 buses. And the thing that I think you might remember is the people who invited us to Art MI, they invited me to do a really massive print of the one that you saw with Lenin holding the girl up for the entrance hall of one of the office buildings, and that was in 2014. And then Russia invaded Ukraine, and the project was cancelled. So there was that, it was a very strange shift where somehow it then became too close to being somehow, I don't know, celebrating.
God forbid you become political in your work. God forbid.
I know. Run. Yeah. So yes, the tenants of the building would not approve, was the explanation given. So that was interesting. So I thought, okay, so this work is sitting there and it's going through time and changing with time. Even at that time when I was out there, the curator who I was working with gave me a load of books on iconoclasm and the history of statuary. And there are periods of history where we have very little. For example, German fascism, we have almost nothing. There are a few things preserved in very few places, but that was pretty much tabula rasa, removed. And socialist statuary also was largely removed. There's very few places that, certainly not many places that have made a park with the statues. And he had the most terrible time trying to get funding for it. So it was, so it always was kind of difficult with objects that are political, that had a propaganda function, to kind of rescue them as an artifact of history. In some way, if that's what you want to do, right? You don't have to do that. You can also chuck it in the harbour.
Like all racists should be. Sorry. I was going to say something about there is an element of self-portraiture as well around these works, because it wasn't the early works, it was always your body that you were casting yourself, and then building these mannequins, that was the strange thing. That was the Das Unheimlich element for me when I saw this work, to borrow that German phrase, of like first of all, I went, how did she crawl up into that sculpture? Or how did she hang for so long off the object, before I then realized it isn't actually you, but it is you, right?
So this is giving away a bit, but it's not it's not all the same person usually. They're sort of they come apart. So there are often there might be my legs or my arms, someone more attractive for the head, you know. They do wear my clothes largely, so that and that was often a cause of questions, like why are they dressed in such a middle class way. But it is me projecting myself into the world, and that's still the case now when I'm, you know, in a cave or on a stone or on a boulder or climbing, or it is me kind of trying to get close to something and kind of failing, obviously, also at you know, like you have that kind of desire to make something your own or to occupy it in some way, and it's kind of doomed to go wrong.
There's something quite lovely and intimate as well about like some of the postures. Like there's one particular work I think of that's in Deep Time Dip, of the hands look like they're embracing the pillar, the rock, the sculptural form. It's something almost like, you know, it wants to hold on to time or hold on to the monument in some way. Is that also, are you conscious of that when you're positioning the kind of posture of these appendages? Or is it all play? I'm really curious about like
the process. It's really hard for me to really analyze that, but largely I just explore how you know, I explore how that surface or that texture or that space opens up the possibility of some kind of intervention. And the whole project of Touchstone is really very much about love and loss. I lost my mother in 2020, just as I was supposed to go to that residency, and then it was postponed by a year. And my work changed a lot, I think you'd probably think, looking at it in that time. And sort of trying to, and anyone who's lost someone knows that sort of desperate way in which your brain is doing acrobatics to try and find some way of having them back in some way or another. And so I related to also the Neolithic sculpture, which are often burial sites, the stone circles, and, you know, the fossilized rock and the creatures that are fossilized in the rock. That sort of idea of time being something that does never do anything other than pass and become more distant and ever harder to hold on to. So it was that kind of sort of gentle gesture at really having no chance of winning.
Well, that kind of then speaks to that lovely work that I saw on the Whitaker show, the Touchstone show, of the kind of monuments, the screen printed monuments, where you talk about that we all have a second death. Do you want to speak a bit about that? I love your polemic use of time, the way you talk about pieces.
So the piece that's actually in this show that I think is possibly what you're talking about is called The Two Ends of Memory. And it's a marble headstone that I found in a skip. And I got to the skip. It was actually a marble merchant, and she was like, "Oh yeah, the headstone guy from next door uses our skip. I don't know why." So I climbed in and retrieved as many pieces as I could find, and it was. At first it was like, "Oh, fantastic!" And then I got them to my studio, and it was just the most bizarre feeling to have someone's broken headstone in my studio, and I had to have it there for a while before I had acclimatized to it enough to do something with it. And so one side you see the lead lettering, the name, the dates, etc. of the headstone and all the wear that goes on the stone, and then on the top you see the beautiful white shiny Carrara marble, because obviously the local stone wasn't good enough for a headstone. You had to import that pure stone from Italy. And on the other side I printed images that I took in the middle of summer, thinking about what is it, like how would you summarize that feeling of being alive in the world, that short moment where you're in a blooming meadow, you're dipping a toe in cold water, and you're really alive. And so that was kind of speaking to, it's actually a concept in Judaism that you die twice. You die once when you die, and your memories die with you, and you die the second time when the last person who remembered you is gone. And I thought, you know, your headstone in a skip, that's the moment nobody remembers you.
But you as an artist are going to live forever. You'll never have that second death, right?
Hurrah. Because no artists are ever forgotten.
No.
Can I interject?
Especially women.
I always think of you as an urban archaeologist, and the materials that you find, from the stone and the marble to the tarmac that you found, that I believe had something to do with the M1. But do you just come upon these materials, or do you seek them out?
So it's usually that I find something and then I love it for some reason, certainly with the tarmac, and then I seek it after that. And so, you know, any roadworks, anytime a road was being dug up, my partner would just go, look the other way. Because they're quite big and heavy, and they're quite kind of weirdly sticky as well, because the bitumen tar never really dries. And yeah, they're really not suitable to be made into art, but I found a way.
No, do you want to go in, Anna? I was going to then ask it a bit of a segue, because the other thing that I remember about looking at your work on that Art on My website, because I felt a little bit unnerved, was you had the exact same approach as I did to stop motion animation and film. And I remember, I have to tell you my story about how I ended up in working in this style of stop motion animation, and then you can tell me your story about how you ended up in it. I saw, as a kid, because I'm from a working class background, the only way I saw visual culture was freely going to the Butler Gallery as a kid, or the Crawford, but also RTE, which is our national broadcaster. Derek O'Connor has told me this, who's head of culture there. He said that somebody in RTE was looking for children's programming, and they were completely broke at the time. And so they had discovered that Eastern European filmmakers had made all this thing called animation. And so they put all these Eastern European films, avant-garde films, on a children's TV hour and exposed me. Yeah, right, okay. The shock. If I did this now, Tusla, a social worker, would come in and take my children away from me. So as a kid, I saw Jan Schwankmeyer, Yuri Laka, Esther Krombakova on primetime TV hours on RTE. It's so radical to think about this, like avant-garde filmmaking presented on Network 2 and RTE now in comparison to what we have now. But then I saw your practice, because that was my education into like filmmaking, or this kind of approach. So it seemed logical to go into that stop motion surrealism, to talk about the proletariat or censorship in the same way that those artists had, and we were in a theocracy, so it was a great way to do that. But then I saw your style of filmmaking, which was exactly the same, and I was like, how did you end up making this type of work? Sorry.
Not at all. It's really interesting, because of course the artists are probably the same that we saw, but I started with The Golem by Meyrink. So when I was a teenager, I found that book in my parents' library, written in old German script, and it was hard to read, and that kind of really added to the whole experience. And so that gave me the idea to make something with clay and make clay move, and an uncle told me how to do it. And then I moved to London, and in London at the time, there was loads of fantastic short films on Channel 4. I mean, we don't have any of that now, I don't think, but at the time there was a program called Animate, and lots of people got grants to make films, and I saw the Brothers Quay, Tom Tom, and yeah, I was absolutely totally hooked, because I think it combines the two things that I've always found really fascinating, which is the sculptural and the two-dimensional, and the fact that you have, with animation, you have that impossible, wonderful moment when you do this ridiculous activity for ages, and then afterwards it comes together magically and comes to life.
That's the thing, it's literally turning the inanimate into the animate. It has this amazing visual fiction as at play. It's completely...
Yeah, but I kind of had to stop making films because I had to eat.
That's my problem, Liana.
Nobody mentioned this.
Nobody tells you if you don't make any money, you can't sell the video works. This is so true. But it's very interesting, because I mean, Anna has been great around, as always, at curating this program, and wanted to know more about your work. And I said, please look at our early film works, and it's fantastic to see this show reel of works because it gives another insight, a completely other dimension to the practice.
I hope that the animation element, in a certain extent, is still in the work. Like, I do still think about the work in that sense, and obviously the more lifelike the figures would become, the easier you could animate them in a single image, and that kind of surrealist connection stays with me. The very earliest artists that I loved were the surrealist women, Merit Oppenheimer and yes, Dora Maar, that wonderful image she made of the black hair, not unlike yours, with the little tiny sailing ship in it.
The figures in the sculpture are very performative in their ways. I wondered if you were ever interested in performance art, because they do really have a place in the film. It's not always you, but you have other figures acting out, say, things that you would like them to do. Has that ever been of interest to you? I mean, it does feel that from a lot of the work as well.
When I first started, I was actually a circus performer in my spare time. I was doing trapeze. So there was a very performative, but I don't actually like being looked at. It's not something I like. So it was much better to find a way of having that deferred. I am at the moment actually working with dancers, and that's been really fun and really interesting, because there is obviously that kind of collaborative element.
Yeah, there's a few images there that I hadn't seen before, with a dancer at the end with many arms and.
Yeah, so we cast her body, and then we gave her body parts to perform with. It was really interesting. We're doing a project together in September.
And the piece in Bilbao in the Guggenheim, was you live casting while was it Richard, the musician, who was live performing?
Philip,
sorry.
Philip Schlotter.
Your cousin, sorry, I forgot that. Yeah. I was playing the music, and you were live casting, so it was about even demystifying the process a bit, wasn't it? It was a very interesting performance in the Guggenheim.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing to try and do, because nothing about casting is interestingly visual or fast enough to do in front of an audience. So yeah, it took a bit of coordination, and I did it again the following year in a different venue, and the bloody plaster wouldn't set. And so I had to make this immense mess on the stage, and then we just pretended it was all intentional. And walked off. Just quickly chucked it in the bin.
Because of the climate crisis, artists are having to think differently about the materials and how we do things. How does that affect what you do with your art?
So the environmental element of the new work is quite an important. I think, like many other people, the pandemic sort of got me also really thinking about landscape and nature, and working up there in the Peak District is very interesting, because you have beautiful nature, but you also have very heavy industry, and it's all in very, very much in the same spot together and interacting in interesting ways. So the found object kind of was an attractive way to make a sculpture or a statue, because you aren't adding to the sum total of expensively and pollutingly made things. And so at the moment I'm working on a public art commission using the cone section of a quarry classifier. It's like a 4-ton steel monstrosity that looks like it's there to listen to aliens. It's quite a nice shape, but it already existed. It was in a scrapyard disused, and they took it down there for me, and that did feel good. It felt good that was a kind of.
I saw that image. It's amazing. What are you going to do with that cone? Are you doing some of the print work on top of that also?
Yes, so it's going to be covered in imagery, and then it sits there, and we will have some interactive elements, so people you can sort of, it looks like a giant megaphone in a kind of way, and the imagery is all around stone. It was a limestone classifier, so it's all around the area. I took the images, and I worked with figures as well as with dancers from the local area, to kind of making them climb around dangerously in caves and things like that.
I was going to ask you a bit about your time in Ireland, right? Because how the hell did you end up in NCAD? That was another question I wanted to ask. Like, what brought you to Ireland?
I was when I was a teenager. I travelled around with a very good friend of mine who wanted to be an actress, And so we went first of all around Germany, looking at. She would go to the acting school, and I would go to the local academy, and you could make an appointment and talk to the professor. And after the fourth academy of talking to a man in his 60s, no offense to any present men in their 60s, you're great. But I was like 18, and they were all painters, and I just sat there, and I just couldn't imagine myself in there. I just thought, what are they going to do with me, and vice versa. Now, in hindsight, of course, we have more of an idea. And then I travelled further afield with my friend, and she ended up in Utrecht in Holland, going to drama school there, and we went around Ireland hitchhiking. And we ended up at NCAD, and there was a nice guy working there during the summer who gave us a tour, and it looked like a sort of paradise village of art. And I was like, this is it. And so I applied, and I only had to send in a portfolio. So that was quite easy, and then I started the following year.
And did you find, like in terms of even the context of the work that you make now, was there an influence? You were here during the time the Troubles were on in the north. We spoke about your trip to Derry, which sounded bizarre.
Yes,
yeah, go on.
Singing revolutionary songs, sitting on sort of, barbed wire fenced walls and stuff, totally oblivious. Totally, we just thought it was a great laugh. With all these Northern Irish teenagers who I think they thought it was great. Yeah. But it was a very interesting time for me, and I think there were great influences, like Dorothy Cross was already exhibiting a lot then, and I remember really being impressed by her work, and also Emma was amazing, and there were things happening at the college. There was actually an artist doing live casting in the year above me. Her name was Åsa. She was from Sweden, and I sadly don't remember her surname, but I did try to remember it. She was casting feet, and I just thought that was the best thing ever. So it had a huge impact. It was a year of kind of core studies, so I got to use all manner of media, and I've always been someone who likes to work with multiple media. And the artists that were teaching were all kind of young and really active, like Teresa McKenna, and it was just had the most fantastic time.
It's wonderful, really wonderful. And then you went back to London to the RCA.
Well, no, actually, what happened was they said everyone was leaving. I think maybe that was still the time when people were
95, right?
95, yeah.
It was a grim time.
Everyone was leaving from my year, and my tutor said, well, I think you should apply to Goldsmiths. And so I did, and I got in, and it was 3 miserable years, but it was probably good for me work-wise, I imagine. But yeah, that's what I did. So I moved to London the following year, and started and did my BA at Goldsmiths, and then I did my MA at the Royal Academy.
And then, this idea, as context has shifted around, like Brexit has happened, you're a German artist based in London. And we've talked before about the kind of strange in-between that you fit, where you are identity-less. So you're not quite British, you're not quite German. How does that then affect the way that you think about your practice or navigate trying to sustain yourself as a practice?
It's a really definite fact to be a foreigner. Being a foreigner is never at any point an advantage, because you're not really in a position to speak to the experience of the place you're in fully. This is much less so in London, where everyone almost is kind of foreign, and the rest separate into such disparate groups of the super rich and the working class that sort of being not belonging is an element of the experience of living in London. But being foreign, of course, I had no idea that that's what was going to happen when I was 19. But there are so many things about being foreign that are absolute, that you will never overcome, you will never shake off. There is not a piece of text about me that doesn't mention German-born in the description, but it's a fact about me. But of course, the Germans aren't interested in me. When I've exhibited at, Kunstverein Tübingen or in Berlin, they usually introduce me as a British artist. They're often surprised when I speak German. So, so you're kind of in this no man's land, and in a way, the way I have come to terms with this is to understand is that is kind of a place that suits me. It's a kind of way I never really feel part of anything anyway, and so it's a really nice way to kind of be able to look at things and contextualize them across different places that I know quite well, but I'm not entirely that. But I really thought about it when I was listening to your talk again, talking about the Irish experience and what does it mean? How do I invent Irishness now? And that you actually do have to do that now with the history as it is. And I thought that is a position that I find amazing, that you would be so of a place that you could reinvent it. Like, I absolutely would not feel that I would be able to do that. And when I was in Orksworth, I was talking to people who lived in the same place of this area near the Peak District for hundreds of years. They knew their great-great-grandfather was a toolmaker, a mile down the street. That kind of rootedness I found absolutely fascinating. But of course, my whole family was refugees from all over in Germany too, so the rootlessness runs deep.
Yeah, no. Just I think you mentioned something earlier on the radio about the idea of what people remember their loved ones from the Neolithic times. You mentioned something on the radio about that. Is that what you mean also?
Oh God, that interview this morning.
Courtesy of Kilkenny.
They were lovely. They were lovely. So there will be people here who will know much more about Neolithic history or that kind of remnants than I do. But there does seem to be lots of questions about what they mean, and so you have the freedom, in a sense, to approach them and think, what do I think they mean? And being on Stanton Moor, where I was doing the project with the 9 Ladies Stone Circle, I thought, so we know that these are stones standing up, some of them with designs that you can still see, and we know that there are people buried nearby. So there is a chance that they felt about their dead really similarly to how we feel, that you so desperately want a place that you can go to be close to them, and that you can somehow conjure that kind of magic moment of togetherness in this way, and maybe across generations even, to connect you to a place. So that was that. Yeah, that was that idea of the memorial stone. That perhaps the memorial stone is something we've done for much longer.
Have you ever been approached then, because memorial was this really profound word in the UK in particular for such a long time? Were you ever approached by the fourth plinth? Or is it the fourth plinth?
Not yet.
No.
Give me a chance. I have several ideas.
God, you would be a perfect candidate for interpreting it is called the fourth plinth, right?
It is, yeah. Does everyone know what the fourth plinth is? Yeah. Trafalgar Square has 4 big plinths going around the Nelson's column, and 3 of them have a poorly remembered man on a horse on it. And the 4th one was meant to have another man on a horse on it, but they never quite got around to putting him there. And so at some point, somebody, I don't know who, had the wonderful idea of allowing contemporary artists to do a commission for, I don't know, a few months at a time. So there's been all sorts of brilliant stuff up there. Yeah.
I kind of think we should do something similar. We did do something similar outside Dublin Castle. There was a temporary commissioning. Alan Phelan did a project. But I think monumentality has the same sort of resonances with us, especially within this kind of post-colonial, neo-colonial context. Very famously, the last show last year that I was on the panel with was Ellen Harvey, and she had this project called The Disappointed Tourist, where she asked people to submit images of spaces that no longer exist anymore, or tourist attractions. And one of the submissions I gave that she turned into an object was Nelson's Pillar, but it was halfway between the journey of Nelson's Pillar disappearing. So the IRA had actually blown it up but it was kind of half left. And the Irish Army came in to blow up the rest, and they blew out every window in North Dublin. They did such a bad job. I always thought this was a really funny thing, but even there's something Flann O'Brien-esque about our relationship with monumentality. Like Queen Elizabeth, there was a statue of Queen Elizabeth, and she was buried in the grounds of Imma because nobody wanted Queen Elizabeth around here. And she was eventually sent off to Australia.
Oh,
There's so many commissions for you here,
I
Liane.
know. You had nicknamed Queen Victoria the old bitch.
Yes, I did.
And
That's
unapologetically also in Australia.
Oh,
What have
really?
the Australians ever done to you? Yeah,
Well,
but
they're us.
But yeah, the thing is, if you keep the statue long enough, then eventually you can keep it. Like there's something about objects that they go through all these kind of iterations, and eventually you can keep it. Like probably the Colossus of Rhodes was a real bastard, right? But now we're quite happy to have his boot or whatever foot that's still there, if it even is. Can't remember. But that idea of having objects, to take the rap, as it were, for historical actions, I find that absolutely fascinating, because it is animation, right? We're using the sculptural object in lieu of whatever real person. All the stallion statues that I looked for when I was doing the project with the small bronzes, they were all cursed, every single one of them. Every local area had a cursed stallion statue, and you would touch it, you would die. You would transport it, you would die. If you were the sculptor, you were anyway doomed. And I find that absolutely fascinating, because we understand the presence of evil. We understand evil very profoundly and in our body, and this idea of the poisoned object, I think, is really fascinating.
It's very interesting how the object gets imbued with a power then, and becomes this kind of like, I suppose, an urban legend or something. There was this tradition in the west of Ireland here, because we had similar kind of ideas, that they would send monks out wearing a mirror around their hearts to go and view relics in Europe. And they would unsheath the mirror to catch the reflection of the relic in the mirror. And then they'd quickly wrap the mirror and take it back to the parish. And then you would go to get healed by the mirror, because it had absorbed through osmosis the power of the relic.
It's like a relic on the cheap.
It is. Yeah, it's a super discount pound world relic.
Didn't have to pay for the skeleton with the diamonds on it. Yeah, no, it's fascinating, that, isn't it?
Shall we open the questions to the viewers here? I'd say there'd be maybe a few questions about. Anyone have some burning question for Liane or Aideen here? Oh, Bob, I can always rely on you. That's great.
It's so close to what you just said. The Nelson's Tower, it went in chunks to a landfill.
Yes.
And Jerry Moran and some other people here were involved in the Arts Festival back in the 70s. They got a flatbed truck, and they brought about 16 chunks of it back here. It's around the fountain behind Butler House, and people sit on it.
Oh my God! Wow.
Oh my God!
Do it,
We
Liane.
have to
We
go and
have to
find
go and look
those.
at it. I believe all the rest of the remnants were put on top of the burnt Guinness's house in St. Anne's Gardens. So they used it to wreck the rest of the shell of the Guinness's house. So, but we have to go and look at that. Absolutely, that's a great observation.
The Germans are also very keen on burying statues. It's a really popular activity. So the project I did in the Citadel Spandau, I think there were some images there of kind of white marble, Prussian-looking statues. They were all buried in the Tiergarten Park. Sort of quietly and quickly, because they were worried that the Monuments Commission of the Allies would doom them as being dodgy. And so they quickly buried them, and then they dug them up again, and they had no idea what to do with them. So they just sat there in the rain and got worse and worse, and all sorts of limbs missing and everything. And then they finally took them into this exhibition at the Citadel Spandau. If anyone ever goes to Berlin, you must make a visit to the Citadel. It's an incredible place. And they also have a giant red head of Lenin which used to be obviously with a body in a housing estate. And that was an interesting thing about socialism. They made huge public monuments for very low sort of areas, like council and housing estates, middle of nowhere. You'd have this giant statue because it was for the people.
Whether they liked it or not.
Whether they liked it or not. Although when they took it away, they didn't like that at all. So the people really wanted to keep their Lenin. And instead they got a sort of by committee designed fountain of like stones from different places. But they buried it in somewhere outside Berlin in the sand, and it took the Citadel Spandau something like 5 years to get permission to dig up the head. So finally they dug up the head and they put it in the exhibition. It's an absolutely brilliant object. Fantastic artist who made it, Russian sculptor, but of course, yeah, wrong side of history.
Very good. Thank you. Your talk is fascinating, but I'm just curious about your form of print. What kind of how is it printed onto? What kind of print process?
There are loads of different kinds of printing involved in my work, depending on what kind of material it goes to. Some of them are digital, some of them are using photo emulsion, and some of them are transfer prints, depending on what the material is and how flat it is and how awkwardly shaped it is, etc.
Does the object come first and then the photograph, or do you have both going at the same time? Like, does one inform the other?
Mostly the object comes first, but sometimes I have a picture and I'm looking for the object, but that's actually much harder.
Sorry, another question. You have one particular piece down in the gallery, and there's a big metal piece in the middle of the floor, or to the right, and you have this image inside of it, which is quite beautiful, and like a little cocoon, it's like a cave, it's beautiful. But my question is, would you have had a flat piece of metal there and then put your image onto it and then manipulated the sheet of metal?
So you mean the one that's quite big? It's a piece of that is the piece of church roofing lead that I was talking about earlier. So that would have been flat. It's completely soft and pliable like lead is. So that would have lied flat, and I printed it directly onto the lead, which is why the image is so dark and kind of doomy.
But actually, it's very interesting because in the touchstone version of this work, where you installed it in the Whitaker Museum just outside Manchester, you had that kind of it looked like it was rolling like a tongue out of the chimney along the floor. And so even in that, you still brought that essence of play and playfulness
and
animation, exactly, animation all the way through it.
That is a different piece of
was it a different one?
It's a very thin lead flashing. It's 8 meters of thin lead flashing, and because they had this lovely fireplace, I kind of used the fireplace to disgorge this piece, but we didn't have space for it here.
No,
so.
we'd have people falling over it all. Health and safety, unfortunately. What happens next for you, Liane, when you just did the show at Touchstone, you've been involved, you're a very busy woman, I know, from the various things that you're up to with commissions and whatnot. Does this lead to a period of pause for you or are you full of ideas for the next body of work, or do the commissions sort of demand work happening, or do you have a time to spend in the studio to think what next?
So I have a commission, the Public Art Commission I mentioned. I have that launching at the beginning of September, and it's not quite finished. So I'm going to be doing that straight away on the way home. I'm stopping there for a couple of weeks. So that's the next thing, and then I perform the piece with the Chinese dancer and musicians around the idea of being a foreign body in the landscape. And after that, I'm hoping I'm going to have a good run of quiet time in the studio. I've got these huge, beautiful chunks of slag in the studio, which is a byproduct of iron smelting. So the slag is like a kind of liquefied set of minerals that you don't want. They're the waste product. And 100 years ago, when they were don't worry. 100 years ago, when they were doing it, they didn't dispose of this or recycle it. They just dumped it, And so there is a place at the side of the river where it's with erosion, you're getting like whole strata of this stuff, and it's bluish green, and it looks like glass. And it is a stone, and it isn't. It's a natural looking thing, but it's not really existing on, certainly not on this planet, it might on another. And so it occupies that space between natural and man-made, and makes that bridge between us and being nature and not quite feeling part of nature that I'm really interested in at the minute. So that's what I'm going to be thinking about when I get back.
Sounds great. Anyone else got some? Yes, far away.
So you already talked about how your work changes over the period of time, and it changes in its context. So in the world of Instagram and TikToks, do you encourage people imitating your work, or how do you feel about, because some of the work is very pictorial and we see people doing similar things with statues and stuff. Would you encourage that? Would you like to see that happening, or what are your thoughts?
You know, I think the only way to stay sane in the age of Instagram is not to think about that. I mean, probably many people have done something like what I do before me and will do it after. And I'm rather fascinated by it because, of course, I like it because it's like, you know, it's like the work I make. So I have connected actually on Instagram with lots of people who work in a slightly similar way because, of course, you do end up liking what they do. I think it's a really important thing, and I say this to students actually, do not try to try not to have people in the back of your head when you're in the studio. There will be people working in a very similar way to you. And nowadays you're aware of somebody who's 25 is making something in rural Virginia. Like 30 years ago, you would not have known about that person. Like by the time you knew about someone, they'd had a solo show at a major museum. That's when you knew about them. And so in this kind of immense amount of cultural production, I think you just have to look at it as a big river, and you're swimming in that big river. And, you know, you are going to be always unique. Like your project is your brain, your life, your experiences, all the things that happen to you, the weird things you find by the side of the road. And the sum total of all artists' projects that I've ever seen have been completely original. But you probably couldn't pick out a single piece and say that is completely original. And maybe that always was like that in a way. We're just more aware of it now.
Living in the age of appropriation. Just goes on and on. Any other questions in the group here? Otherwise, there's somebody. Yes, Dennis.
I'd like to ask about, in terms of what you feel is the most important element of the practice. So there's many levels to it. But for you as an artist, you know, what is the most, you kind of hinted on it on the last answer, but I'm kind of keen to know a bit more about what keeps it going, what keeps it alive, what gives you the energy that you, what's the most important thing?
That's really hard to say, but I suppose you have to have an emotional response to the idea. So if there is some kind of strong emotional response to the idea, then I'm kind of willing to go through the pain of making it work, which can take ages, as you know. Dennis O'Connor, fantastic sculptor. But also I think for me, there are always things left undone. You know, there's always these things left undone that I've left somewhere. And when I get the opportunity of picking that thread up and carrying on with it, I always feel that that's a really satisfying feeling. Because you can't explore everything all the time, and you sometimes also don't know what to do with something, and then 10 years later you suddenly know what to do with it. And I'm quite a slow thinker and slow burner, and you know, I think everything that's happened to me has happened because of the way that I am, and so it makes it kind of easy to understand. So the activity in the studio is obviously something that will always be there, but it changes sometimes it changes according to the kind of studio space I've been given, like the work suddenly gets bigger or smaller or more expensive if somebody's given me some money. But the core of it is somehow has to speak to kind of my idea of what that magic is. And I think that talking about relics is quite interesting, because I think you can sort of tell in my work that I was a Catholic, like even though I'm not much of a Catholic these days, but I think you can just sort of tell that sort of the magic of the object and that magical thinking of association and very pictorial and visual, and the figure and the body as a kind of site of pleasure and joy and pain and suffering and regret and all that. You know, I think Catholics do that stuff well.
I suppose the act of, it's not that you're taking on all the time, but knowingly you have this energy to find ways, and I think that's key for artist survival, finding new ways to produce, to show it, to get the commission, and to live, not be hungry, you know. But it's something inside of you that's maybe very different to.
I think working in different mediums too helps to spread those ideas. You know, when you're working in film, it's sort of a different muscle to the one when you're in the studio making sculpture or photography. There's so many elements going up, but it all kind of relates back to probably what you first did in art school. It stayed with you throughout the years. You've redeveloped it in different ways, but that use of different mediums gives the work a huge breadth, I think, for the audience, and shares those ideas in an interesting way. Did you?
I was going to say, actually, it's also about collegiality. I mean, even the fact that this conversation has happened is because you become friends with other artists who champion you, as you have championed me and I have championed you. And all boats rise together is the message I sent you in WhatsApp the other night. It's about that you're also a part of a community, and you're encouraging everybody along. And that's how we get a scene. That's how we get people's going, what's going on in Kilkenny? You know, like, you know, it's something about that. And we're still in contact with all of our art homies. Yeah.
Through all the disasters of life.
Yes.
And it's actually that moment I walked into NCAD, I think I thought, this is a place where there could be community. And I never felt that when I walked into an art academy. And I think even though obviously I didn't quite know how to conduct myself in these spaces, my instinct was probably correct, because if you think of the art academy with the big professor at the top, very hierarchical, and the art schools, British and Irish art schools, are much more, younger artists teaching young artists, and you connect with them and you stay in touch with your students and you stay in touch with your tutors and create that community. And to me, other artists and curators and writers and people who are really interested in art are kind of what keeps you going through all the different moments. And it's so inspiring. Like, if I'm having a terrible day, I will do a studio visit, like always. I will bother my friends until I find one who will say, yeah, you can come over, I'm bored anyway. And I find nothing more inspiring than sitting in someone else's studio and seeing their stuff and their thinking process and their sketches and the weird stuff they've cut out of magazines and stuck on the wall. And it's just something about that space for me that is just the only space that you need.
Yeah, it's true.
I have a question. In the photos where you situate your body with the monuments, what I understand is that you search through body and space, but do you stop at an aesthetic point, kind of where you ramify it when you take a photograph? Is it more aesthetic, or do you then kind of, does the symbolism come after you take the photo, so when it becomes an image, or is it part of the process before?
I love the fact that you call this the monument, because it's actually an old lead mine smelting thing that looks like a weird Aztec temple, right? Yeah. Obviously it's an aesthetic decision. I'm taking a photograph and I'm making a picture, but I don't always, it's not like, I'm like, oh, that's the picture. that's the one, like I'm not like that, unfortunately. So I will try loads of things, and a lot of it is about exploring what's possible between the figure and the space, and where there is space to put things and how things behave, and then the lens will kind of show me something else, and I will sort of move it up and down, and I end up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures that I'm selecting from. And I often don't use the one that is the best picture because it's not the one that works for the object that I want to use it on. So there are aesthetic decisions all the way through, for sure, yeah.
But is there pressure for kind of symbolic interpretation of how the body interacts with the object, or no?
Yeah, I think there is, but I don't think you have to. I don't feel like I have to work very hard for that, because if you put a very vulnerable looking kind of a figure, especially they're often kind of women, not always women, but often women sort of with very little clothes, and they're with these very injurious materials and objects, and you immediately have that that conversation between the human body and the environment and the industrial environment and how that interacts. In my show, there is a piece suspended from the ceiling. If you've seen it, it's on a piece of steel. It's a steel door that's been sort of crudely cut out by someone when the thing was dismantled, and I've put a body from two sides on each side, and that kind of epitomizes for me that relationship, that sort of vulnerability and injuriousness, and I think kind of does talk to our environment and thinking about how to treat our environment, how to do things differently, to be more friendly to the ultimately really quite fragile human frame.
There's also a lovely relationship between the handmade, because all of these spaces are spaces of material production, and that's a deliberate choice, right? Isn't it? You're always looking at spaces where the body was involved in cutting things out of the landscape, and then it's your process of casting the body, putting the body back into the landscape in a way. That's always been that kind of consideration, hasn't it? It's always been an alchemy that you're on the quest to turn the coal to gold. I feel, anyway, that's just my observation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's very interesting to think that. Yeah, I mean, I obviously like the body just as a form, because it is so symbolic, and because you can't help but imagine yourself within it. So when you see it, you can relate somehow to that space. But also, I think animation, the animation that comes through that is interpreted differently through the statues of women in the Glorious Oblivion project, and it doesn't have to be women, it could be anyone. If you put a statue up to a person, you're using the figure, the sculpted figure, as a kind of proxy point. So we somehow feel that object will be better at commemorating that person than it would if we had a stone with their name on it, or that would then mean that they're dead, whereas the sculpture itself somehow talks to eternity. But it doesn't work. Like I spent 3 years finding statues of women. You'll see a few in the show. And I can tell you that statues do not help people be remembered. But
there has been some dreadful statues of women, like Mary Walthamstow in London, for example, that god-awful sculpture. It's poor. There's poor. You just become objectified as this desirable sexual object as a woman in monumentality, right? That seems to be the consistent thing from what I can see.
I mean, the thing that I found actually across the spectrum was that women's statues are always really small. And when you think about statues that are life-size, they're usually much bigger, because as statues look small when they're life-size, but women are usually life-size or smaller. So you see photographs of them, and I've traveled like long way to get there, and then you get there, and it's this puny little thing covered in pigeon shit. I mean, there were statues that are so hard to find, and nobody knows where they are. Like people live there, right next to the thing, and they have no idea who it is. So it was interesting also, the kind of powerlessness of the object in some ways, because legacy and memory is a living thing. Like, we have to be talked about, we have to be spoken about, we have to be written about, our work has to be shown, published, performed. That's how a legacy exists. A legacy, you can't put a legacy in a stone and stick it somewhere and hope it's gonna survive.
that's how you don't have the second death.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you've just got to have, loads of young people in your life and bribe them.
I think we have another question there.
I'm just curious, how do you deal with the ephemeral nature of some of the stuff? I was looking at your work at the weekend, and I'm very precious about things I do. And in particular, that squashed aerosol can. I really want to clean the rust off that. Mine doesn't work. How do you deal with that?
So I found that as it is. I didn't squash it. And so it is what it is for me, you know. And I don't really know even what it was for, but I just assumed it was going to be the thing that I wanted it to be. So I put that little mine shaft on it, and you can just see the feet crawling away in the tunnel. I like dirty things and grubby stuff, and I will go to quite some lengths to get stuff that other people would not touch. I mean, I have carried things home and cleaned them, and my partner is very tidy. But I tend to feel like that is the biography of the thing. You know, the thing is really lived and it's done, and that can obviously had a lorry go over it. It wouldn't be that nicely flat otherwise. So yeah, I like it for that. Some of the things are more fragile than others, so that piece is probably okay. It's metal anyway. But the bark piece that's hanging in the corridor, I finally had that framed. It wasn't framed for the longest time. I had it just sitting on a plinth, but it fell twice, and I thought, well, it's not going to be there if I don't frame it.
Well, the marble pieces will outlive all of us, I presume.
Yeah, the marble, the lead will be there long after us, unaffected.
I think we've taken up enough of your time. I hope you've enjoyed a conversation with Aideen Barry and Liane Lang. Do visit the gallery. The small catalogue there is available for sale at the gallery. So thank you for your attention, and a round of applause for Liane and Aideen.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna.
Thanks, Anna.